important topic. Yes, the gender issues. Let us see from the gender lens the agribusiness. Ma'am, the floor is with you.
Thank you very much. As already said, I'll be presenting on gender disparities in agribusiness and the value chain, which also has an impact on sustainable development. And then my presentation, the next one says, talks about the key definitions. Since I'll be talking about gender, so we are to define gender, which refers to economic, social, political, and cultural attributes and opportunities which are associated by being women and also being men. And also their gender as a social, cultural expression of particular characteristics and roles that are associated with certain groups of people with reference to their sex and sexuality. And then the gender disparity itself, it refers to differences in women's and men's access to resources, the status as well as the well-being, which is usually favors men and are often institutionalized through law, justice, and social norms. And the agribusiness itself, we're saying it is a sector encompassing farming and farming-related commercial activities, which involves all the steps required to send an agricultural goods to market, namely production, processing, and distribution. And then we continue to say value chain is defined as analytical as well as an operational model. The model which takes us up to that fact that a product is rarely directly consumed at the place of its production. In many countries, in Africa, in Asia, all over the world, where it is produced and where it is consumed, it is different. And also in the process, there are raw materials which are called intermediate products, and final products are always owned by various actors which are linked by trade and services. And each of them, they add value to the product. And then sustainable development, which is the idea that in human societies must live and meet their needs without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. And then we're saying gender disparities in sustainable development. In that context, what it means, we're saying in sustainable development, the gender disparity encourages us to think about how to improve economies and societies without compromising the natural environment or the well-being of the future generations, or else for any development effort to be sustainable as well as effective, it must consider the needs of all people, including those who don't typically have a voice in decision making. Excuse me?
JR Dash, we're going to need you to mute yourself, please.
Gender disparities in sustainable development, we're saying it is addressing the gender inequality, which is very essential in achieving sustainability in agriculture. High levels of those inequality make it harder to increase productivity and reduce poverty and hunger, which is mostly in most countries where incomes are highly unequal and have an average or lower levels of land productivity, are more prone to food insecurity. For example, in Malawi, we have SDGs, which is Sustainable Development Goals. We're saying these inequalities, they slow down in terms of development, which is sustainable because of inequality. And also the gender inequality undermines the progress towards sustainable agriculture development across multiple dimensions. The status quo says women have got less access to male-female labor. And also women's lack of cash incomes translates into lower use of contemporary farm technologies. Another status quo is that women are less likely to plant high value crops. Another says women face disadvantages in access to credit and land. And also another status quo is that social norms constrain the availability of women's own time for agricultural work. And then the gender disparity now in agribusiness. We're saying women and girls make almost half of the agricultural workforce in developing countries. And that workforce is typically large. For example, 60% of all employed women in Africa, especially the south of the Sahara, work in agriculture. Yet these women in agriculture face a variety of obstacles and constraints that make their male counterparts, most of the male counterparts do not face them, including lack of access to training, machinery, and new technology. In high unequal countries, the majority of farming population, particularly women, lacks the economic resources and the capacity to invest in appropriate agricultural technologies, as well as the knowledge itself to improve the agricultural practices. Because of the disparity in access, women farmers face an increasing knowledge gap. The gender disparity in agribusiness, as we continue, we are saying women have difficulty in access to land ownership. Most of them favors men. Men can have access to land, but not women. And also the extension services, the one that men have got a larger, men are well exposed to the extension services, and also the financing itself, agricultural credit. For instance, in critical farmers to manage the seasonality of agricultural income and expenditures, and to invest in technologies and long-term farming improvement. For instance, in Malawi, we have got extension countries in Africa like Malawi, we have got extension workers. But this extension is an extensive literature review that confirms that the link between increasing women's land rights and poverty reduction. Land rights can also be seen as a key factor in rural households that seek out economic migration. A recent report from FAO analyzed the synergies of land rights in Niger and how it affected the majority of rural population vis-a-vis food security and sustainable agriculture development. As we can see, women in the picture, women, they're the ones that work hard, but for them to have the land on their own, it is not an easy thing. What are the possible solutions? Various tools are available to help reduce inequalities between income groups and between genders. And also, one in strengthening the land tenure rights among poor rural farmers. This element is critical to addressing the first layer of inequality. If a woman cannot own a land, she cannot be in charge of their own livelihoods or a destiny. And also another approach is to develop innovative strategies to improve access to credit and agricultural services for marginalized farm populations. There's also an issue that requires strategic investment in public goods and programs that benefit marginalized populations. These include the rural infrastructure, education, health services, and programs such as credit, subsidized inputs, information, and extension. Yeah. As we can see, this is the productivity, which is gross production value, which was constant between 2004 to 2006 in terms of agricultural area. It remains constant. But by the end of the day, what is it? In an ideal situation, confronting gender social norms in agriculture sector, it includes policy interventions that target women's engagement in agriculture sector, which involves women in policy formulation and implementation, as well as empowering women through knowledge skills, building capacities of women on financial management, and also engaging men as partners. Another one would be improve the women's farmers' access to climate smart labor saving technologies for agricultural production and for household use. For example, save labor in unpaid care and domestic work, which most of the time it is women, such as those that improved even access to water and improved access to energy. And then the gender responsive climate smart agriculture extension services, which looks at capacity building on gender sensitive, the CSA approaches. Ideal situations, we say women's access to and control over land and other resources, which looks at improved seed, fertilizer, finances, etc. And also that there's a need for more gender disaggregated data as well as revisions of statistical instruments. And also the data generation should be interdisciplinary and collaborative, whereby government stakeholders with a special emphasis should be targeted on marginalized groups, which is women as most vulnerable. Let's look at the gender gaps in agricultural productivity. We look at countries like Ethiopia. I just sampled the few. I looked at countries like Ethiopia, Malawi, Rwanda, Uganda, and also Tanzania, whereby we look at women in 2015, those gaps, it only shows that the women are the most affected when it comes to disparities. And then about value chain, it is also known that women's work often takes place at least in valued parts of a value chain, like home-based workers or informal workers in more general. Women tend to be underpaid, and most of the times it is informal. Their jobs are less secure. In an agricultural setting, women are often not visible. Whilst they do a large on the farm activities, and moreover, it is well documented that women own rural businesses tend to face many more constraints and receive far fewer services and support than those owned by men. And also from the value chain or business perspective, it makes a lot of sense to look into different roles and tasks of men and women in the value chains, and to use a genderless while identifying and addressing bottlenecks for value chain development. But from a general economic perspective, unequal growth is inefficient. Whilst this perspective is especially used by international economic institutions such as the World Bank. But from this perspective, it is argued that gender inequality has a high economic cost and leads to wasted human resources and missed opportunities for innovations. And then we look at the importance of the value chain, which you are saying globalization does not only patch up market gaps.
If possible, short your presentation. The time is running.
Yes, I'll just pick up the main points. In globalization, for instance, some people need support for becoming actors. Others important belonging to value chain as a role of people play in negotiating powers in the value chain. Was also some actors that stuck in value chains which exploit more income possibilities and also advantages of the whole system. I'm winding up. And then the general consensus, we're saying inequality is not only about inequality in incomes, but also inequality in opportunity, according to World Bank, the report of 2006. And also inequality is integral to form most of the social inequality, therefore poses particular constraints to economic growth. We see a practical example of Malawi, the impact of gender disparity in public service. It was an article that came out just yesterday. And then most of the causes of these gender disparities, we are saying things like poverty, and also the social customs, beliefs, and practices. Also high levels of illiteracy, lack of unemployment facilities, social attitude, and so forth. What about the possible solutions? There's need for women, there's need to talk to women and girls, but also to stop child marriage and sexual harassment. making education to be gender sensitive through empowering of mothers. Conclusion, we are saying there's need to do more in terms of gender disparity. And also there's need for exposure so that when women and girls are traumatized, they need to do more so that they should avoid. And also the exposure that they normally expose themselves to chronic stress, which acts as a setback, should be discouraged. The school of thought, what do we do to avoid gender disparities, even in agriculture, in every other sector? What should we do? This is the end of my presentation. Thank you so much for your time.